So, you can start now. How I would define a country being garbage, I use four categories. One, I look at its military, and two, I look at its diplomacy. And three, I look at its leadership, and four, I look at its politics. Let us get into Russia for the four proofs I have. For the military being garbage, a proof there is kind of obvious, but there's also the fact that they have 300,000 casualties against a country who is the 15th world power. That is globalfirepower.com, by the way. There's also the New York Times about that. Their diplomacy is also garbage. They can't solve war that they want to end as well. Their leadership is garbage. They're probably going to get another revolution, and the source for that is Reuters, by the way, or Global News.ca. Their political situation is shit. What do I mean by that? Their political situation currently is Putinism, and Putinism is a pan-Russian variant of ultranationalism. In the international area, Putinism is characterized by nostalgia for Soviet times and a desire to regain the situation before 1989. So that's basically what the political situation of Russia is right now. Sources www.ice.ac.uk. And for China, their military is also kind of garbage, and a source for that is unheard.com. Their Air Force is also really garbage. I can get into that for hours if you want. Their leadership is shit, as in Xi Jinping can barely lead his country right, and it's about to collapse. And their diplomacy seems fine so far. And that's
Is that on my end, or did we lose him?
I've lost him for a couple of seconds. I don't know about you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hold on. Gotta bring him back up. There we go.
Yep.
I think it did the thing yet, but what's the extent you guys heard?
You just said that their diplomacy is fine, and that was it.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. So let me restart this to another 10 minutes, and I'll add that to the overall time. And whenever you start, DB, I will start a timer.
Okay, good evening, everybody. And as I said, I do think that the affirmative in this position is the challenge statement, which was Russia and China are of no threat to the West. Just as we can affirmatively debate whether there is proof that there are no gods, we can affirmatively debate whether there are gods, we can debate whether OJ is guilty or innocent. So I think it's a proper affirmative statement to say that Russia and China are of no threat to the US. I also think that it's a statement that is incorrect. I agree with Dreamspace's assessment of the Russian and Chinese militaries. If anything, I think that Dreamspace was not harsh enough on the Chinese military. The Chinese military is all bark and no bite. It's, oh my God, it has a nuclear aircraft carrier with a big, massive crack on the flight deck, with no experience of K2 bar operations, with no even green water capabilities. The Chinese Navy almost starve on their own routine patrols. I had a friend who, when I lived in China, I had a friend who spoke to a sailor who thought he was going to be in the Navy for life and couldn't hack it after one tour because they were almost out of food. But whether or not the military is a threat does not really answer the question. A lion can still be threatened by a gazelle if that gazelle goes around killing all its food sources, damaging the ecosystem, and scaring away the cubs. Just because the gazelle cannot attack the lion effectively doesn't mean that the gazelle is not a threat to the lion. And the same goes for Russia and especially China. The idea that Russia is not a threat to the West, I would say, is refuted by the fact it invaded Ukraine at all. Russia is a neo-imperialist power attempting to annex a sovereign state, and which has made no secret of its desired end goal to abolish all the countries in Eastern Europe that separate the Kaliningrad enclave from Russia proper. Russian propagandists and RT, for instance, have made no secret that this is an end goal. They also routinely threaten nuclear annihilation. Yes, obviously they're not doing it. I don't think they ever will. Putin is not stupid, even though we invaded Ukraine. I don't think Putin's stupid. But that's not the point. Putin believes that he holds a gun to the head of the world. Putin has invaded a sovereign country. Putin is a threat to the international order by any meaning of the term. And now we move to by far the more dangerous of the two countries, China. China is led, in my opinion, by the 21st century Hitler. Xi Jinping is not merely a dictator. He is not the next Mao. He is the next Hitler. And there are two main reasons that I say this. The first is that he is literally committing a genocide. What is happening in occupied East Turkestan, called Xinjiang in Chinese, is nothing short of a genocide. Concentration camps, cultural annihilation, bulldozing of all their heritage, sterilization of women, the separation of children from their parents and then being raised in Mandarin-only orphanages to never be seen again. This is genocide. And we are one satellite image of a chimney away from never again happening under our noses. If that's not a threat to an international order that was birthed on the idea of never again, then what is? Secondly, we have the ever-present issue of the self-governing independent country of Taiwan, which routinely faces threats of being invaded by the 21st century Hitler, believing that Taiwan will be his Danzig or his Czechoslovakia. And if that is not a threat to the international order of things and to the idea of self-determination, which is allegedly supposed to be a fundamental principle of international law and which was asserted most fervently by the same non-aligned movement that China is seeking to debt trap or cozy up to dictators there, then what is? If self-determination means anything at all in the modern world, it must surely mean that a state which was never under the control of the Communist Party of China is not part of the Communist Party of China's territory. And therefore, it should be defended and it should be given the means to defend itself. And the so-called strategic ambiguity that we have is helping nobody. If 100% of homes have guns in them, there might not be home invasions. But if we all have maybe a replica gun or maybe it's a live gun, well, now there's less of an opportunity cost, because if I break into the home, we might find that the gun doesn't work. So strategic ambiguity doesn't help anybody. And now we need to talk about how China is threatening the West directly. And there are several ways it's doing this. The most obvious way it's doing this is through the data harvesting operation known as TikTok and through other spying operations that it's conducting and activities that can only be analogized to Scientology's policy of fair game. The Australian swimmer Mac Horton, for instance, said that Sun Yang was a dope cheat. He is a dope cheat. But ever since he said that, he has been subject to harassment of an unprecedented scale, with glass shards in his swimming pool, with his dog being poisoned, with acts of vandalism against his home, directed from the Chinese consulate in Brisbane. Drew Pavlou in Australia was attacked by Chinese Communist Party cultists at the University of Queensland, who then said that he assaulted them essentially by his fist hitting their faces, if you're silly enough to believe that. He then also was falsely framed for a bomb threat at the Chinese embassy in London. This is the literal taking a leaf out of the book of Scientology. This is Operation Freakout, the attempt to frame Paulette Cooper for bomb threats she never made, done again with the sanction of the second largest economy in the world. And then we must talk about how China has no intention of abiding by international law, or domestic law for that matter. In my native city of Belfast, China built an illegal wall around its consulate. It has not torn it down, and nobody has the spine to knock it down, even though it's literally been declared illegal by the domestic authorities. In Manchester, a pro-Hong Kong demonstration resulted in the consul of the Manchester consulate dragging people into the compound to be beaten up under the auspices of diplomatic community because I have to defend my country. And we see routinely videos of international students interrupting presentations on issues sensitive to the Communist Party, such as the existence at universities. We are seeing a repeat of the interwar period where German minorities in Eastern European countries were under the thumb of the German government and were used to cause trouble and take advantage of the same minority regime the German government did not respect. And the same goes for the international order. Diplomatic immunity is fine when I'm dragging people into a consulate to be beaten up. But I don't want to respect the arbitration of the Tribunal of the Law of the Sea or the World Trade Organization rules to which I have signed up. China is a bad faith actor in the international system, seeking to destroy the system that subjects it to any kind of accountability and in which it can lose anything, like control over territory it never controlled, like the self-determination of minorities like the Tibetans and the Uyghurs, and like its loss of the International Law of the Sea Tribunal with regards to the Philippines. It wants actively to destroy this system and to replace it with a system of nothing, which will allow it to do whatever it wants, whenever it wants, and then vassalize the rest of the world. So that would be the end of my opening statement, and I look forward to the discussion.
All right, so let me go ahead and stop this, add the last bit to the new timer. So we got 52 minutes of open dialogue between you two.
Dreamspace has disappeared.
I was like, wait a minute, we're missing somebody.
whenever I disappear, it did the thing again.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for a second I saw the hand up in the top corner. I was about to say to somebody, no one else is coming up. Then I realized you were gone. And I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
He's the one asking to come back up. All right. I will start the timer, and you guys can go whenever you're ready.
All right. So I feel I should tackle that. All right. So let's start with TikTok. That's a very good point. TikTok, right? TikTok has stated multiple times in their community guidelines that yes, they're stealing from you. They stated this multiple times. Yeah, people still use it. I still use it, for Christ's sake. I don't use it for like big things though. But anyway, yeah, TikTok, it's probably run by the Chinese government, and if it's not, it's definitely just a corporation trying to work hand in hand with them, like Huawei, right? It's definitely
which is required of big companies in China. Actually, under Chinese law, there needs to be a Communist Party branch in locally owned companies that has extraordinary powers.
Yeah, exactly. But here's the thing. Here's the big kicker, right? This would be all fine, great, and dandy if this wasn't the U.S. and we had actual common sense, right? Because like we can always like knock it off the App Store, right? And the only way to actually like get an
Yep.
app would be through like an APK or something on an Android, right? And that
Yep.
already wiped out like
Yep.
0.5% of phone users. Even if we don't get rid of that, we can still just capture one little tiny lake basically in between the Philippines, Thailand, and Indonesia. I think it's like one of their biggest trade routes. I could provide like an image somewhere if you want. But if that one
Hmm.
area was captured and actually held by the U.S., they would get starved essentially because that is one of their
But
like major
I
trade.
don't think that would be good.
It
I
would
don't
not be
think
good
that
at
would be
all.
good.
It would be terrible.
No.
And I believe
Yes.
that they would
Yes.
put up a great fight to get that back if the U.S. did capture it, but I don't think they ultimately would win because the Chinese Navy is still pretty good, thanks to Jixi for providing the info. So since it's actually
The
pretty good,
Chinese Navy is not a blue water navy.
but
The
is
Chinese Navy
capable to
is
being a
a
blue water.
green water navy. No, no, it isn't. It has no logistical capability. It has no training. It doesn't know how to actually supply and refuel and keep a fleet afloat. It has no allied ports. But one of the reasons why I don't really take much stock in the Chinese military is because I don't really think it's relevant to the conversation because the Chinese military is crap, but China is still a threat. Oh. Uh,
I don't know why it keeps doing that. Anyway, yeah, that's kind of a good point, but here's the kicker. Here's the thing, right? For the Navy thing, they do have all of that except like allied ports, maybe allied ports somewhere like North Korea or something.
They have so they're building one base in Djibouti, and that's all they have in the entire world.
Yeah, so like basically nothing there. All right, but like other
Basically
than that, their
nothing.
Navy
Yeah,
actually is pretty good. It could maybe potentially challenge the U.S. Navy, right? It could win a
it
couple
couldn't.
battles. It could. Like the Chinese Navy is not
They
really
don't
nothing
have
to mess with. And plus,
they
even
don't have the logistics to keep a navy refueled, resupplied, and well fed, and they also have no experience of Cato bar operations, whereas the US has experience since at least the first Gulf War, and have basically wrote the manual on Cato bar operations, on the operation carrier task strike groups, has classified the top speed of its carriers, has classified its anti-missile defense systems. Hypersonic missiles have proven to be a damp squib in Ukraine. Surely the same applies to the US. I mean, I may sound like I'm crossing the floor a bit, but I do want to try to be as accurate as possible.
yeah, but here's the thing, right? The Chinese military is again, and I can like provide like multiple proofs how they're nothing to be messed with, right? They are very well equipped. They have a lot of manpower. They have a lot of firepower, and they have a lot of men that are trained well, right? Because the Navy is their crown jewel. That's basically all that they have, right? Because what else do they realistically have? Their Air Force, it's complete garbage. They
They have they're the
their
biggest
Army,
army in
same,
the world.
and can't
They
use
do. They
it.
have the biggest army in the world.
The biggest army in
But
the world without the biggest capability to use it, yeah.
yeah, but their navy is not in a good state either. If anything, I'd be more scared of a ground confrontation with China, purely because of the numbers factor and because the Chinese army does have decent technology. I would be more concerned about a ground conflict than a sea conflict because of the disparities that work in China's favor.
Well, I'd personally be more scared of a naval battle. One, because their navy is
Mm.
actually really good, and two, if we manage to capture that one lake, I'll just nickname Lake Hyrule or something. I don't know. If we
Yeah,
manage
yeah.
to capture Lake Hyrule here, right, and tries to reclaim it again, they're probably going to do it. Albeit we'll reclaim it again, but
Yes.
ultimately they will win a really good number of battles. and that just shows how good their navy is, right? And I'd be more scared of their navy
Well,
than their
again, I
ground
think
because one, their soldiers can't even aim a gun properly. Props to Jixie. Their guns are actually really garbage, breakdown usually, and
yeah.
they also have like just barely any training, minus even aiming a gun. They can
Yeah,
barely run
but
straight.
so but the same is true of the Chinese Navy. That they so the Shandong, the big flagship, look, we've got a nuclear aircraft carrier, is less technically advanced than the Nimitz class aircraft carrier, which is currently being retired and replaced with the Ford, and is of comparable capability to the Ark Royal, maybe slightly less, that was decommissioned in the UK. Yes, the Chinese Navy is not to be dismissed, and the Chinese Navy would become a very important part of any attempt to do a Danzig on Taiwan. But I don't share your concern that it's this big major thing. And again, I don't find the military issue that important when we aren't dealing with two powers that are even remotely comparable militarily. But that doesn't mean that the weaker power cannot be a threat to the smaller power, especially when it has a large economy and when it's literally turning itself into a massive country-sized cult.
Yeah, but here's the thing, right? About that, for like America's scale, China's navy ain't shit, right? but
Yeah,
for like the
yeah,
rest of the world, their navy is absolutely godsend, right?
yeah,
The
compared
navy
to
is what
most of the
should
rest of
be
the world.
expected from a third world power. It is what should be expected, right? And China basically kind of fulfilled their promise. And I only say China's navy is really good in the sense that they'll only be able to win a couple naval battles against the U.S., which is an amazing feat, right? That's how
Well,
good they say
yes,
it.
that would be, yes.
Yeah, which is pretty accurate. And for I forgot what else was what I was going to say. And since China won't ultimately be able to win in the capture of Lake Hylia, right? They will eventually be starved out, right? And let's just say Lake Hylia just doesn't exist, right? Like we
Yeah,
can't starve them because they're trade whatever. Let's just say magic. We can't do that, right? Even on the
yeah,
land, right? The U.S. could realistically rip their entire air force apart in a matter of
yeah,
probably minutes, right? They could dismantle the
yes.
entire Chinese Air Force and leave them absolutely nothing to do while they're sitting there
Yes,
picking their ass, right? They could like the only thing they
which
can do is
also,
just like point
yeah,
their fucking anti-air systems and try and search for
but
something that's not there.
it's not really the point. Neither power wants or is planning for a direct military conflict. So the fact that the military disparity exists, I personally think is really superfluous to the question because, oh, we'd defeat them in a military conflict. Yes, but there isn't going to be a military conflict. America can be Superman, but Lex Luthor can still become president of the United States, even if he can't physically defeat an indestructible Superman. Lex Luthor is still a threat to Superman, just so China is still a threat to the United States.
Thank you for that. Anyway, I can kind of see what you mean, but I'm just gonna say this. All the point of what I was trying to say is that if they truly actually ever became a threat, we could easily dismantle them without a second thought, right? And let's just ignore the military for the question. Just ignore that shit, right? One, there's probably already a civil war in China starting soon, and I focus on China so much because Russia's never been a
I
threat anyway.
don't agree. I don't
No, there
I
is.
don't agree. I've lived there. I don't agree. I don't think there's any prospect of a civil war in China. There's more prospect of a civil war in Russia with what's going on in Siberia, what's going on in Dagestan, and with the fact that the ethnic minority republics are being asked to contribute disproportionate manpower to the war in Ukraine, I think there's a non-zero chance of civil war in Russia. And that actually would be a problem, because what happens if some of Russia's several thousand nuclear weapons go missing? What the hell do we do then? I think that's more of an issue. But the chances of a civil war within China are, in my opinion, zero. The closest that we would have would be a revival of that Uyghur separatist group that doesn't exist anymore. Elim or Etam or something. I can't remember exactly what it was called, but I think the closest analog would be a revival of that Uyghur separatist group. But there's no chance of a civil war, Chinese on Chinese, in mainland core non-colony China, in my opinion. There's absolutely no chance, and that is a testament to the success of the ethno-nationalist fascist propaganda in the country.
Ultimately, in my opinion, I do believe that there could be a heavy, heavy, heavy civil war at the slightest notion, right? I think China's just a ticking time bomb with it because my reasoning is that they're already torturing a lot of ethnic groups that are already tired of this shit, right? We've already seen like a lot of this in the USSR, Nazi Germany.
And they've disarmed, and the citizenry has been completely disarmed, and it's been a capital offense to own a gun since the establishment of the People's Republic of China. Yes.
What do you think the Russian Revolution did? All right, so like a big revolution, I think will eventually happen, right? Do I think it's now? No. Do I think it's later? No. Do I think it's way later? Probably. It's probably not going to happen within like.
Well, I'm going to have to disagree with you on that, purely because of the Soviet experience. So I was at a university reunion in Japan back in 2018. So this was just before the Hong Kong protest, which no was not a thing. I was speaking to a couple of expats in Hong Kong who lived in Hong Kong, and the wife of the husband had been a student in East Berlin in 1982, I think it was, and she was asked, "Do you think the Berlin Wall will come down because of solidarity in Poland?" And she said that the Berlin Wall won't come down in her lifetime. And look what happened. The Berlin Wall came down less than 10 years later. And I personally think that China's property bubble is a major, major threat to social stability. Something we could wake up one day happened that nobody could have ever predicted, and suddenly Xi Jinping is tied to a horse and cart being ridden through the streets like in Richard III's time in England. So I don't think we can confidently say that. But I do agree with you that we can confidently say that there is no objective reason to think that that is likely or even plausible.
All right. Well, I can agree with the first part, as in like, yeah, shit happens, right? But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but again, as stated with my points before, I do think a revolution is very, 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 very likely, with lots of people being like too fed up with this shit, right? Like in Hong Kong one time with the COVID lockdowns, people were screaming from their
Yeah.
balconies to be let out, right? It's crazy. If you guys want to hear more shit about it, you guys can search up Hong Kong and COVID protests from Jimmy Dore. It's what was I gonna say? Yeah, let's even ignore like a revolution idea, right? Let's just completely throw that out the window, right?
Yep.
China and Russia are saying they're going to make a global currency that will rival the U.S. dollar, right? This, to me, seems to be the only way they can actually realistically threaten the West, including Europe, right? This
But
seems
they
to be the
can't
only way
really
they can
threaten the
actually
West
threaten
because
it.
of that.
Well, no, this seems to be like the only
60% of
way
all
they can.
60% of all transactions are still done in US dollars. 3%
Exactly.
of transactions are done in yuan. Almost no transactions are done in rubles. De-dollarization isn't necessarily a threat to the US. The only thing that would be a threat to the US in this case would be yuanization or rubleization, neither of which I think are credible.
So you and I both agree that their new currency is never going to work, right?
I agree completely. It's never going to work.
Great, because that's their trump card.
Yes.
I can provide so many proofs that that is their only trump card. They have no other real trump cards, maybe by TikTok, right? TikTok
China's
and
Trump
some virtual media
China's
is
trump
their only
card
thing.
is to keep releasing maps claiming territory it doesn't own and hoping that if a lie gets repeated often enough, it will be the truth. The only problem here is that they're not just repeating a lie, they are taking illegal maritime actions against the Philippines. They have illegal little blue man fishing boats. They have their actual illegal fishing fleet that's plundering the world's seas. All of these black ops that they're doing and these influence operations, and the fact that they are fascists trying to say, if you do anything we will fuck up your country, even if we can't do it militarily, that is a
Yeah.
threat. And what's also a threat is that they have carried them out. Even in something as petty as two Chinese tourists weren't allowed to check in early to a hotel in Sweden, and suddenly Sweden is enemy number one and their fucking ambassador is being summoned. This is pure coercion. They are threatening countries for doing anything that they don't like, literally anything, which is why I say that their goal is to destroy the international system that subjects them to any scrutiny and create a new one where they dictate terms to the entire world. And the only saving grace that we have is that they are too incompetent to play their cards close to their chest.
I think there's a quote that Gold was made about that, and I think Xi Jinping took that to heart. I think the quote goes by, "If you tell a lie long enough, the people will eventually
It
believe
becomes the truth.
it." Exactly.
Yes.
But here's the thing.
And if you want to tell a lie, you tell a really big lie, like Taiwan is a part of China. That's a really big lie, and yet here we are.
I do believe that they are a joint government, but I can go into that later if you want. So
Well, I don't disagree. I don't disagree with the idea of the 1992 consensus, which was that we both agree with the words one China, but we disagree with what one China means. But the party that is repudiating the 1992 consensus by its actions is not the Republic of China, Taiwan, but the oh, hello, but the mainland. The Republic of China, the still official name of Taiwan, is not repudiating the idea that there is one China, and they are China, or at least they weren't until very recently. The 1992 consensus fell apart when the Chinese mainland decided that they would not abide by the second point of the 1992 consensus, which is we can disagree with what one China means. One China must now mean we control Taiwan and we will hold a gun to the head of the world to get them to repeat the lie often enough.
all right, so yeah, with that, the Chinese Civil War never ended, right? And what I mean by there's two
Officially,
governments in
yeah, it
China,
never
yeah,
ended.
it never ended. And what I believe,
Same with the Korean
what I
War.
believe
Yeah.
by two governments and what's currently going on, what's currently going on is that the Chinese ROC government controls the
Yes.
mainland Taiwan, right, and the PRC controls mainland China itself, right.
Yes.
These two governments are
Yes.
controlling two separate regions, but are still two different governments of the same country, right? I don't think people seem to actually
That
believe.
is the official position.
Yeah, China technically has two names and two flags and with two ideologies, right? China
Yes.
itself has two governments. Taiwan isn't a country. China isn't a country. They are actually just one country that have failed a civil war.
Well, that was the official position until mainland decided to repudiate the 1992 consensus through her actions of demanding that everybody says that Taiwan doesn't exist, which repudiates the 1992 consensus which was predicated on the ability of the two sides to disagree and that disagreement being respected. That disagreement was not respected by the government of Xi Jinping from 2014. This wasn't a recent thing. And this led to the spike in Taiwanese nationalism. The Taiwanese no longer consider themselves Chinese at all. Like they don't even think we are. The Taiwanese people think we are not China anymore. And if the right to self-determination, which was such a big animating force in early international law, driven by decolonized states in Africa, driven by Latin America, driven by the liberation movement against the apartheid government in South Africa, if that means anything at all, then it must mean that Taiwan must be allowed to exist and that only the Taiwanese can determine the future of Taiwan. Meanwhile, we have Xi Jinping going full Hitler at these military rallies, saying he will rejuvenate the nation by destroying Taiwan. That is a threat to the global order.
Well, the thing is, right, the fact that they're threatening Taiwan, it won't really change that much. Really, the only
and
thing
Russia will never
Taiwan
actually cross the border into Ukraine.
Give me a minute.
And what did they do?
Just give me a minute real quick.
Yeah.
You're good.
Yeah.
Anyway, the only real use that we use for Taiwan, I'm pretty sure America already admitted themselves that Taiwan is just merely just a military benchmark for them to place their military stuff so they're closer to China, right? It's basically where they're going to place their B-21s.
Not really. We already have South Korea for that.
Well, no,
we already have South Korea for that. Taiwan,
well, that's why we have two areas.
Taiwan is being defended increasingly, unless you're Ramaswamy, Taiwan is being defended for increasingly intrinsic rather than extrinsic motivations, because there is a recognition that the forcible annexation of a democratic country by literal fascists poses a threat to the global order. That a world in which literal fascists can wake up one day, abolish a country and annex it, that doesn't end at their borders. We might not want to be Xi Jinping's business, but Xi Jinping will make himself our business in the same way that North Korea makes itself business by throwing nukes around. Xi Jinping makes himself our business by threatening to abolish countries he doesn't like.
All right. Well, here's the giant issue, right? Do you think the U.S. genuinely cares about Taiwan's being? That's one. You can answer that in a minute.
I do.
And for two,
increasingly, I do.
Sorry. For two, what's the second thing you said earlier?
What do you mean?
Oh no, never mind. I think I know.
Okay.
For countries that China is exterminating because it doesn't like, I love that term. For that, I do think that the countries that they're exterminating, it doesn't really help or not help anything really. They kind of just there, right? I don't think they really help.
Okay, we're talking about Okay, let's talk about exterminating. They're exterminating Uyghurs. Well, they're almost exterminating Uyghurs. They're exterminating Uyghur culture. They're exterminating Uyghur identity. They're exterminating Uyghur children's connection to their culture. They're sterilizing women so they can't have any more Uyghurs. It is the only ethnic minority area of China with population decline. This is not an accident. They are trying to exterminate the population. Is the routine extermination of a minority a threat to the international order?
No, not really. Although I do believe that
how is it not a threat to the international order?
Because they don't really affect anything, right? They're not like.
So the international order was predicated on. The international order is predicated on the ability of the international community to step in. It is predicated on a rejection of the idea that accident of birth means that you can be tyrannized by genocidaires. That is literally what the was founded on. So how on earth does letting a minority potentially be wiped out not threaten the international order?
Because the international order is already kept by the US, which can easily peacekeep the entire world.
And the international order owes its legitimacy to actually enforcing the instruments of the international order, the first of which that was passed after the UN was actually not the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which China also doesn't respect, but the Genocide Convention. The Genocide Convention animated the ability of the international community to get its fingers out of its backsides and do something in Yugoslavia, for instance. So if we are now going to sit and say that if you're big enough, you can genocide as much, surely that's a recipe for all manner of horror afflicted across all manner of groups across the globe.
And with that, I do believe wholeheartedly that we should invade China, and it's not going to be a bloody battle. It's going to be a relatively easy battle. It's going to be a
I don't
relatively
think we
quick,
should
easy.
invade China, but that's not the point.
I know, yeah, well, it kind of is. But anyway, if we just invade them, basically all of these problems would stop, right? And are they truly problems to the West to begin with, right? Are they truly a
Yeah,
threat?
that worked very well in Iraq.
What's up?
That worked very well in Iraq.
Well, here's the thing. The people in Iraq were like disguising as civilians, and
Yes,
that's
they
just very
were.
tough to actually like deal with, right? People in China are very superficial. They're going to have lots of quote unquote honor on their side or whatever, right? They're well the soldiers at least, right? And they're going to be wearing typical military
I
clothes. They're not going
don't
to be
really
disguised as civilians.
agree. I don't really agree with that in the whole honor thing. The only experience that China's army has in combat was
You cut
that
off.
they don't. So the only combat experience that China really has that's well known, maybe there's more, maybe if anybody knows any more, they can put it in chat. But the one that they're best known for is the UN peacekeeping mission where they ran away from men. But let's make another analogy here. North Korea. Let's say North Korea collapses tomorrow. Should South Korea immediately annex North Korea, and would that not
Yes.
cause any problems? Because we're not just talking about the military, we're talking about what would come after that. And would that not cause massive problems for South Korea and for the UN if North Korea collapsed?
It wouldn't. It would start a lot of problems. Not as big as people might think, but still a lot of problems, right? Because South Korea is going to have to deal with an up north economy that's basically non-existent, a huge housing crisis, people dying from starvation. They're going to have to fix all of that, right? And the UN,
Okay,
along with the
yes,
US, are going to have to help.
yes. Okay, so so what would happen if you take the North Korean situation and you multiply it by, let's calculate how many times, um, by about 56 times.
Jeez.
Just on a population level, and that's before we talk about the regional inequalities, before we talk about how the fact that 70% of China lives on less than $100 a month to this day by the admission of the Chinese government. But I mean, I almost think this is like a red herring, that what the situation would be like if China collapsed isn't really relevant to whether it's a threat. It's a threat in the position that it is today, and it is a greater threat today than it would ever be if it collapsed. The collapse of China would be a geopolitical catastrophe, which I think would be worth it, to be completely honest. I think it's better than the alternative.
Definitely.
But but that's not why it's a threat. It's not a threat because it might collapse. It's a threat because it won't collapse. It's being turned into a cult. It's led by a literal Nazi, and it's militarizing its entire society and brainwashing its entire society to make them want to march and die for Taipei. That's what makes China and spy on the world and go out and do foreign influence operations and disrupt our universities and destroy our freedom of speech on Chinese issues abroad and harass critics and use hostage diplomacy. That's why China is a threat. Whether or not China collapses has nothing to do with whether or not China is a threat today.
Yeah, well, if China collapses, there will no longer be a threat if there was one to begin with, right? And I bring up collapsing so much because, it's likely what's going to happen, either by U.S. intervention or by their own means, probably by either or at the same time or separately.
I would say almost certainly by internal means.
I could definitely believe
Almost
that, right?
certainly.
It could go either way, and I can strongly believe either way, right? China's fucked. China's never ever going to succeed in virtually any aspect, right? It's like Nazi Germany in World War II. They never had a chance of winning.
Chinese
right? Never.
Oh yeah, my favorite example to support your point actually is the previous administration of the Philippines. Rodrigo Duterte practically worshipped the ground that Xi Jinping walked on. He wanted to be a strongman, Xi Jinping, and Xi Jinping kept making illegal claims into Philippine maritime waters, to the point where Duterte's government brought the case to the Law of the Sea Tribunal. Duterte went back into the arms of the US. Duterte insulted Xi Jinping. If Xi Jinping had just done nothing, Duterte would have came to Beijing seeking realignment. Instead, he alienated the Philippines because he's claiming vast swathes of territory China never owned. But because I say I own it, I own it. Force me to comply. Oh, wait, you force me to comply with the Law of the Sea Tribunal? Well, fuck that. I don't care. I've decided it. That's it. And that's the extent of Chinese diplomacy. They can't even do nothing right. I do agree that that's, but it's also a threat. We have a big, massive bully, a massive economy, a massive population, and an expanding navy trying to literally ignore international. You rode against me? Well, I don't care. Force me to comply? You can't. That's a threat.
I can kind of agree with that, but here's the kicker, right? I'm going to pull up Nazi Germany as an example because it's a perfect example for these analogies, right? So for Nazi Germany, right? They're one and the same with China's, and they had no chance of winning, right? But in that time, Nazi Germany was still a major, incredible threat. You can agree with that, right? Like they
yes,
won't
absolutely,
like
and I agree. It's a
but here's the thing, right? China can't do that by any means, either militarily, diplomatically, politically, just by any means they can't, right? They don't win any scenario, right? And even if they do try to do anything like this, which would be a threat, right? They're going to meet with ultimate, complete, utter failure, right? They have done these things for little tiny little bumfuck seawater countries, right? But they have not done this to the West. Why? And the West is including
that they are going to
Europe,
attempt
right,
this.
And the West itself, right?
Yeah.
They don't do this to the West because they are scared. They're afraid. They cannot match up to us in any aspect
that they
whatsoever.
are attempting it is a threat. If they succeed, there are two consequences that are undesirable. The first is that you give them an inch, they will take a mile. We know this. The second is that if they succeed, then the international order that was supposed to stop them becomes harder and harder to legitimize. And if that international order is no longer legitimized, the world doesn't just become a playground for fascists in Asia, it becomes a playground for fascists in Europe, called Vladimir Putin. It becomes a playground for various fascist groups in Africa and in Latin America and in basically the rest of the world, and possibly the West. Was to stop Viktor Orban from going full-on dictatorship if there's no international system left to take him in check. We don't have to leave Europe out of this. The international order being completely upended this is a threat to freedom everywhere, from Hungary to Russia to China to Honduras to the Sahel region, where there's been so many coups recently. And the fact that they will attempt with a belief that they will succeed that is not completely unfounded. We've been too soft for too long. The fact that that's going to keep happening is a threat.
Well, no, not entirely, right? Sure, they are like if you're talking about like TikTok and just a data collection industry, yeah, I do believe that is the only feasible means that they could do anything to threaten the West, right? And that is the only thing that they're actually reasonably
Okay, what about what's happening? What about what's
do.
happening in Australia? What about what's happening in Australia with the Scientology fair game activities against Matt Horton for correctly identifying one of their swimmers as a drug cheat, and now there's literally been, well, almost attempts on his life. If you put glass into a swimming pool, swimmer, I would say that's an attempt on that person's life. So the fact that they're basically trying to kill him, and the fact that they're framing young men in Australia for bomb threats to get them put in prison because they protest against them. What if they export that abroad and now nobody has to hold them to account? And nobody's allowed to even draw attention to their rights abuses or even talk about things they don't like. Is that not a threat?
What this sounds like? You want to know what this sounds like to me? This to me sounds like that they're running out of options because they can't do anything. They can't do anything, and they're like resorting to trying to bomb frame some Olympic guy in Australia because they have nothing else they can do.
But the point of Matt glass in the swimming pool, Drew Pavlou is the guy who was framed for a threat. What they're trying to do when they do that is to say, we can target you anywhere. We aren't even targeting Chinese dissidents anymore. We're targeting the entire world. So shut up, let us do what we like, and let us parrot our propaganda completely uncontested over and over and over again, or we will come for you next.
While the rest of the West is laughing, because sure they can do that for like the rest of the bumfuck water countries in Asia, right? They cannot.
Australia is a pretty significant country.
Yeah, sure they can like do some wee bomb like a bomb frame to some like a Olympic swimmer, right?
Frame job, yeah.
Yeah, but like that's the most that they can do, and even then, I could do that, and I could have the same threat level as China, right? It's not.
When you do it, you go to prison. When they do it, they retreat literally into the consulate in Britain, and they claim diplomatic immunity, and they get away with it. And the police can't collect. The Australian federal police can't collect any evidence. Or what happened in the UK. When protests happen outside embassies all the time, that's part of the point. You protest the government's policies outside its embassy. Unless you're in the consulate in Manchester, where the consul himself pulls somebody behind the gates to beat the living crap out of him, hide behind diplomatic immunity, and then says, I have to defend my country. No, you don't, you thug. But that's not the point. The point is that they feel this is acceptable conduct and they will export that abroad. And I'm not convinced that that won't have a chilling effect.
Well, if I made a bomb threat tomorrow, right? Let's just say I
You would go to
bomb
prison,
people, right? Hold on. Let's say let's say I don't get caught, right? Let's say just like with some magic fairy bullshit, I don't get caught, right? With that, I could potentially say that I have the same threat level of China, but here's a problem with that. The problem is that I'm not a country and I'm not doing it for a political aim, but I'm still doing the same action, right? But here's also a kicker, right? China's trying to do it for political aims, but can't. Right? The only thing that they're trying to do with this is they're just trying to scare the world, right? They're just trying to make people like you try and believe that they can do something with this wee bomb threat on an Olympic swimmer, right? They're trying to get people like you to actually believe that they are a threat because they have nothing else they can do. There's nothing else in their arsenal that they can actually pull out of their ass, right? They can't do anything, right? They're just sat there, just doing bumfuck nothing while they're just waiting for their next collapse.
Well, we say that, but they do have power behind them. We have made a Faustian bargain on this ridiculous idea that trading with a authoritarian would export democracy to the authoritarian regime, when all that's happened is that they're trying to impose their values on an unwilling rest of the world. They're doing what they falsely accuse the West of. It's what any propagandist does, accuse the other person of that which you're doing. You're exporting your values. No, no, no. Nobody's imposing anything. People are gradually coming to a consensus through free and open dialogue, unless it's China, where now you have to comply with everything they want, or you can't or you can't be in the country. If you don't censor the internet, you can't be in the country. If you don't censor your entertainment so that there's no undead skeletons because the geriatric illiterates at the Central Committee don't like them. And that's literally the reason. You're not allowed to have undead skeletons in Oblivion in China because the illiterates in the CCP are superstitious, don't like skeletons. Well, that starts to get exported abroad, and they literally do impose themselves on the world. They say they impose themselves on the opportunity, trying to make the opportunity cost of ignoring them too high. And it's a threat to freedom if an authoritarian country is dictating what we are allowed to watch, because if you want to access our market, you have to do this. And then studios are just like, we're not going to make two versions, we're going to make one version. So what happens is the entire world is now subject to censorship by proxy, by imposition of an unaccountable, unelectable fascist regime. Is that not a threat to freedom?
Oh no, it does definitely affect freedom, right? But here's the thing, right? It only affects freedom in China, right?
It affects freedom in the world.
Because they can't actually control the media or anything else for that. Sorry to cut you off.
Yes, if there's one version censored for China and exported to the entire world because it's cheaper than doing two reshoots, that does get exported to the entire world.
Yeah, but here's the thing: they can't exactly control the how would I word this? They can't exactly control the media or just anything like that in another country unless they invade it, right? And
but they do. They do control the media in countries by saying that you will lose access to our market if you don't do what we want you to do, and they say yes. So they do control the media countries, and they do control TV. They do control films and video games and art and websites. Your website's going to be blocked in China if you let people search for Uyghur genocide. That affects people who want access to that rapidly growing market as more Chinese people connected to the internet. And then Chinese authoritarianism gets exported to the rest of the world by proxy.
Yeah, but could you show me an instance of like a Chinese authoritarianism actually reaching other countries that they don't control?
Ubisoft's censorship of one of the Rainbow Six games with no skeletons or spirit motive. The proposed censorship of Tom Cruise's jacket in the Top Gun remake. The proposed censorship of Uyghur and Tibetan origins, which was actually reversed because of fan outcry in the rest of the world. All the websites that are not blocked in China because they allow people to censor content, or they don't allow discussions. Midjourney AI art generator doesn't allow pictures of Xi Jinping specifically for the entire world. Nobody's allowed pictures of Xi Jinping to get into the Chinese market. This is the website that did the deep fake of the Pope and the coat that went around the world. This is not a thing. This is exporting authoritarianism abroad through business.
So far, this seems to be, from what I'm getting from this. Please correct me if I'm wrong. What I'm getting from this is that they are banning things internally, and they are using companies to make their internal banning of these international. Right? That's kind of
yes.
That's your point, right?
Yes. Yes.
All right. So,
and that is exporting authoritarianism abroad.
Yeah, but the only problem is with that is that they don't control the market of Western countries, right? I could
But they do.
But
they control the emerging. They control their own massive emerging market, and now they say to companies, you can't access our market if you don't censor. And many companies have until the last 3 or 4 years. Like the Guilty Gear thing was in 2021, but that was reversed because of non-Chinese outcry. That is maybe that's a trend, maybe that's a positive trend. But what's been happening is that because they control their market and their market is so big, they can say to companies, if your product doesn't do what we want, you can't access our market. You want access to our market, you do as we say. They do as they say, and then the entire world has to put up with a Chinese censored version of a product. That is imposition of their values on other people's media landscapes and cultures. And what happens if that starts to affect the news? What happens if nobody knows what happens if in 20 years' time Uyghur identity has been so heavily suppressed nobody knows what a Uyghur is? What happens then? Does that not threaten freedom? Does that not threaten our ability to respond to human rights abuses if nobody in our culture and our entertainment landscape and our fine art landscape is allowed to draw attention to it?
By the way, since our time's running out, I'm probably going to cut you off a bit more. I'm sorry, but
sure, yeah, sure, sorry, yeah.
But anyway, so
well,
so
just real
for the
quick,
market,
we can add an extra 5 or 10 minutes if you guys want to, if you feel like you're getting somewhere. So if you want to do that, just let me know now.
I'm fine with that.
This is an amazing debate. I love this.
Yeah.
This is definitely one of my best.
All right, I'll add an extra 10
I'm
minutes since you guys have been doing really well, and this is actually interesting to listen to. So,
thank you for that. Anyway, so I guess I'll explain it while he's Anyway, I don't think the Chinese market is actually as big as you think it is. To me, the Chinese market only extends to China, Taiwan, kind of, and some like bumfuck Asian countries like Papua New Guinea. I guess it's kind of under Chinese influence a bit.
So sorry. The Chinese market specifically refers to the economy of mainland China.
Sure. Well, it's kind of yes and kind of no, right? Yes, it means that, but it also does like two completely different things. You know, it's like a word in the English language having complete different definitions depending on like the context of the sentence or something. You know what I mean by that?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So
yeah. But one of the main problems with this line of argument is that even if the Chinese market is not as big as the US, Europe, Australia, Japan, Canada, South Korea, and India put together, for instance. So many companies have become so enmeshed with the Chinese market because in the late to the Adolf Hitler era, the market was quite permissive. They wanted to encourage as many companies to come in as possible, and Chinese markets have become a big part of company market shares. Now, Xi Jinping goes full Hitler, grabs them by the balls, and says, I control you now. If you don't cater to my whim, you're kicked out of my country, and my country forms a major part of your profits. So do as I say.
Here's the thing. What countries are twisting the balls of, and can it actually twist the balls of that country?
Well, they can twist the balls of media and entertainment companies by saying you'll have no access to our markets if you don't censor. And what many companies have done is that they have been lazy and said, well, if we have to release a censored version, we're just going to make one version product and just export it abroad. So everybody is subject to Chinese censorship. Everybody in the entire world is subject to Chinese censorship without consent.
Here, I have a great thing to solve this. What countries do you think are in the Chinese market currently?
Most major media conglomerates, most major entertainment companies, lots of tech companies. It's a major market
No, I
and
mean
still
like
an
as in
emerging market.
I mean as in like that they're not banned in China necessarily. Well, they are banned in China, but also that they have control of them outside of China as well.
Well, the main one is the dodgy gacha game Azur Lane, which has and Genshin, which Azur Lane run in Japan, very lewd, completely uncensored outside of China. And inside of China, they censor it but that's because they know their main market is the US and Japan. It's not China, but and they have the resources and they have the principles to say we're not going to subject the rest of the world to this. But most companies that are bigger than Yostar, are saying, well, if we have to censor for China, we'll just censor for everyone. We're not going to do two takes. We're not going to make two character models. We're not going to make two stories. We're not going to record two sets of voice lines. So everyone has to get the China approved product. That's the point I'm trying to say, that the market doesn't have to be big. It just has to be big enough to impose that.
All right. Well, the thing is, right, is I think you're trying to. I think you're getting confused that China, if they ban a media or something just in China, that it will affect things outside of China as well, right? I do wholeheartedly believe that unless a media or just any company actually complies with like a Chinese censorship ideal, like
Yeah.
outside of China, there's no way that China can actually legitimately control any media outlet or any game or just like anything outside of China itself.
But they control the art and media landscape by doing precisely that.
But how do they do it? Could you like give a real world example of like a company doing exactly that?
Rainbow Six, Ubisoft, Rainbow Six, they removed all the skeleton and spirit motifs because the geriatric illiterates in the Great Hall of the People don't like that. And the entire world now has to do a Chinese approved product instead of the product that Ubisoft wanted to release. There's a specific example. And there are many more. There's many more. I do think the tide is starting to turn with the Guilty Gear Strive example, that they were going to remove Tibet and Uyghur references worldwide. There was a massive backlash. They put them back in. So I do think the tide might be starting to turn, but that's not guaranteed.
So for Rainbow Six, I'm not too familiar with anything, so you can like fact check me if I'm wrong, right? So for Rainbow Six Siege, in China they seem to ban some things in China
No,
itself, right? But for the rest of the
but
world, it seems to be normal.
it's been banned across the entire world. And DJ Batman just posted the best example in chat. Blitzchung was banned from a international tournament for the game Hearthstone for wearing a hard hat and a paint mask in 2019 because that's what Hong Kong, that was for the Hong Kong. He was banned from he's not even Chinese, banned from an international esports tournament for offending China.
That could be a good example then, right? So with that, I could say you're right. Yeah. But how far can that realistically reach, you think?
It's reached further than anyone would have expected it to 15 years ago. We can't sit on our laurels being lazy and think that this is just going to reverse itself. I hope it does. I don't see any evidence. Well, I see things, but I don't see any massive major trends that would make me confidently say this is definitely going to happen. I can't say that confidently, and the entire world should not be under the thumb of geriatric victims of the Cultural Revolution and the Great Hall of the People, that they don't like something. In China right now, for instance, it's becoming increasingly common for people to be arrested for disturbing social harmony, for criticizing traditional Chinese medicine. And with the way that China has been attempting to mobilize Chinese citizens and Chinese students living abroad, I don't think that it's improbable that that could happen in the West, that medical researchers or pharmacists could find themselves targeted for saying that grinding rhino horn won't make your dick hard, so save the rhino. And that would cause massive harm to medical science. And I think that's well within the realms of possibility because it's already happening in China. They can export it abroad.
Yeah, but here's the thing: for medical, like the medicinal, I guess would be a better term, and news outlets, I don't think they go that far, right? I do think for like games and stuff, yeah, they completely can't go that far if what DJ Batman linked was correct, right? But because media, news outlets, I think are like a major source that the West already controls itself, right? Like for instance, America already controls like basically all of its like major news outlets, right? And I believe that if the Chinese market was to expand that far to control those medias, America would have to intervene because one, it goes against their ideals, and two, it goes against their actual authoritarian mechanisms of actually keeping the populace under control, right? Because they are also doing what Global said as well, right? They are doing the exact same thing as China's doing, controlling their media and trying to make the impossible true, right? And with this, China can't possibly actually intervene because the American media is already way too brainwashed to even like consider the possibility of China even daring to even try to consume their media, right? I do think that China can try to consume their media, but will ultimately fail, right? And if they do consume their media, I do think that America.
I think we're almost in a different point. The Chinese are never going to consume American news media because they are being increasingly conditioned to only believe that what they hear in Chinese state TV is true. We are going into full mode that Chinese state media is the only trustworthy news source, and it is putting out xenophobic propaganda. It's saying it increasingly talks or the UK or Italy in particular now. It's now everywhere's on the verge of collapse except for China, and the Chinese Communist Party is keeping you safe, so bow down to the overlords of the Chinese Communist Party. There is a very deliberate and disturbingly effective campaign under the 21st century Hitler, Xi Jinping, to brainwash the entire population into a literal 1.4 billion strong cult. And a 1.4 billion strong militaristic cult of suicide, revanchism, and xenophobia would be an absolute horror show for the world. Now, we're not there yet. I'm not stupid enough to believe we're there yet, but they are actively working towards making this. And that's a problem.
Yeah, but here's the thing, right? The reason why I mentioned the U.S. is because it's one of the many countries doing the exact same thing. Canada is doing
not
the exact
even
same
not
thing,
even
but more or
close.
less banning media. Yes.
I've lived in
Yeah.
China. I've been to China. I've been on the inside. I assure you.
Well, no, I'm talking
and
about
what's
for America
happening in
with
Canada
the news banning,
is
well, the news control.
it's not even close.
I'm not
Not
talking
even
about China. I'm
remotely.
talking about for other countries controlling like media and stuff. Sorry to cut you off, since you were like didn't understand what I meant.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so, like for example, Canada, it controls the entire media if there is a media to begin with, right? With our new legislations, right? If there is a media to begin with, Canada controls it. In Germany, if there's a media there, which there kind of is, Germany controls it. In France, if there's a media there,
but the government doesn't tell them
all
what
Western
to print.
countries control the media. All of Western countries currently are an authoritarian dictatorship, along with China.
Not even remotely close.
How? Oh, we can talk about that for another debate.
Stupidest thing I've heard in a long time. The Western countries are not even close. They don't control things they can't say. They don't force Twitter to take down hashtags at the drop of a hat. They don't censor stories of people drowning in train cars as they're drowning in and they don't prevent people from leaving floral tributes to the victims. Everywhere else is collapsing. They don't export that abroad. It's ridiculous. No, it's not even remotely comparable.
Sure. Just before we end this debate, by the way, because you're not in timer son, I just wanted to say real quick that it definitely does not go to that extent. I completely agree. Definitely doesn't go to that extent, but I do think that both are inherently authoritarian dictatorships today, and we can debate that in DC if you want.
No, we're not comparing apples and oranges here. We're comparing apples with big, massive spike dildos. Not even remotely comparable.
If we look at what they're doing, yes, definitely. But if we look at like the principle and ideology of it, minus like socialism and capitalism deal, it is apples and oranges, right?
It's not even remotely. The First Amendment exists in China. If the government says censor this story, if the government says jump, everyone says how high. If Biden's White House says jump, Fox News and OAN and Newsmax give him the finger. It's not even remotely comparable. And I will leave it at that if you're okay to leave it at.
But I think that the debate's kind of ending here. I would love to debate you about that, though.
Yeah. All right. So far, we don't have any questions, but I'm going to throw a couple questions at you guys here after you guys do your closing statements. I'll let DB, I'll let you do your closing statement first, since you went second. And then Dreamspace, you can do yours.
All right.
Okay, well, I think we've more or less, I don't really think I have that much to add compared to what's already been said. Yes, the Chinese military is overhyped by Chinese propagandists and by pessimistic Western media that think that gay people are bad. So because gay people are in the US military, we're not going to win a war against China. We'll tell that to drones. Drones don't care if you're gay or straight. Aircraft carriers don't care if you're gay or straight. Aircraft carriers only care if there's a big, massive... Aircraft carriers only care if there's a big, massive crack on your runway, like there is in the Shandong. So I don't really think that the military thing is relevant. But But that doesn't mean that China is a threat, that China isn't a threat. China is trying its best to exert ever more insidious influence within our societies and within international institutions. It is trying its best to upend the international order, to destroy the founding principle of international order, which is that there is no such thing as absolute sovereignty with non-interference in so-called internal affairs. You cannot genocide whoever you like. You cannot oppress whoever you like. And they are trying their best to destroy that and violate that and take that away. And once they take that away, they want to replace it with an international order that means that everybody takes orders from Beijing, and they've made no secret about it. It's why they are trying to hold international companies by the balls. It's why they're ignoring the rulings of the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea. It's why they're illegally fishing. They have no respect for international law. They see the Chinese Communist Party as a fascist, ethno-nationalist, Han supremacist government that sees every single other human being as subhuman, and their actions reflect it, including and not limited to genocide. And I think that believing that just because the genocide isn't happening here doesn't mean it's not a threat. The international order was built on never again, meaning never again. Never again might be right on our doorstep. And that, among other things, are reasons why China is still a threat to the West. And Russia invaded Ukraine. So, yes, it's an irrelevance otherwise, but it's still a threat because it's trying to abolish a state.
All right, Dream, you're free to go.
All right, so for me, I do believe that was an incredible debate. Props to you, DB. But I still do.
Thank you.
Yeah, I still do have the same beliefs as I did, but I am left more questioning because he brought up a good point about how China is controlling some companies and just things outside of China itself. Right. I don't think it actually gets so far as to the media. I don't think it does. But there's a possibility that it could, right? There's a possibility that it could, and with that, more gateways have opened up. I still don't think that China's a threat, and if China isn't a threat, Russia isn't a threat, since they're they have a mutual benefit. They're one and the same. With that, I do think China can be more of a threat if they can utilize it, right? If they are a threat to begin with, right? They can utilize a lot of things to their disposal to, actually threaten the U.S., right? And if anyone's going to bring up nukes, by the way, I'm telling you, Jixie, if anyone's going to bring up nukes and say, they're a threat because of the nukes, that is completely just no, that's just bullshit. No.
Agreed. Agreed.
It's just completely out of the park. If they're gonna use nukes, the entire human race is just like done. Putin and Xi might be stupid, but they're not that stupid.
Agreed.
And with that, I guess I'm done.
All right. So to let everybody know that's still listening, if you would like to throw your questions in, because so far we don't have any, but I'm going to throw a couple at them at the moment. Put at MDD stage questions. Make sure to put the name of the person you want to ask the question to, and then your question, or if it's for both, put both and then add your question. But I'll go ahead and throw one at both of you, get your take on it. But for the last decade, China has been systematically rebuilding their Silk Road to be more modernized. They've gotten a lot of countries that the U.S. won't do dealings with because they have human rights violations, but they have basically been building certain facilities like steel mills and other stuff in certain countries, and actually have put them on a lease to the point where they own it for like 100 years. For 100 years, and basically is controlling it, and only Chinese people were allowed to build them. So what is your guys' take on the fact that they're rebuilding it, but more for a military purpose?
Could I go first?
Well, sure, yeah, go ahead.
All right, I do believe that China will eventually use the Silk Road for military purposes, like they're doing right now. Yes, and I also do believe that they're trying to do it for like trading purposes too, right? Because as I said earlier, if they try and capture that like a little lake I named Lake Hylia, right? Then they're basically fucked, right? They need other trade routes besides that so they can actually keep on living, right? But they also need other trade routes to also have I guess like military surprise attacks against anyone who tries to disagree with them. Of course, if they try that on Europe, they will obviously fail though. Hilariously, actually.
Okay. I would say that I actually don't believe that it's mostly for military purposes. I believe it's mostly part of a covert influence operation and debt trap diplomacy, and that's part of why it's a threat. It's a threat because they are flooding, violating human rights regimes with massive amounts of no strings attached cash, whereas the previous system, which was, even in a lot of countries that were violating human rights, it was leading to very incremental, gradual changes. Yes, no, not necessarily satisfactory, but there was change going forward in a lot of the world towards more respect for human rights. And China throwing loads of millions and millions of dollars of no strings attached money is we're already seeing evidence that that's starting to arrest it and form a dictators club to undercut the world order. And that's before we take into account the fact that they are trying to get governments to give key infrastructure as collateral, and they're already calling those loans in. It's a massive that's a massive threat to sovereignty. That's a far greater threat to sovereignty than the idea of human rights. And yet we are in a situation of the scorpion and the frog, where the frog of regimes in Africa have let the scorpion on, and now they're about to complain when they're stung.
I could agree with most of that.
So DJ Batman, if you don't mind, could question late here. It's 12, so
You lagged hard.
Yeah,
was
sorry.
was that you?
Yeah, so and then the last one is the last question I want to throw to you guys because we don't got any more other questions that people have asked. What do you think about the fact that Disney, when they made the live action Mulan movie, filmed it near the Uyghur camp, which they were criticized for, and also making it 100% pro China?
I think it's an absolute travesty.
So we both completely agree there.
Okay.
Yeah, I will leave it at that. It's an absolute travesty.
All right. Well, it seems like there's no other questions coming in. So if you guys would like, we're gonna move. Let me make sure it's empty. Yeah. So for anybody that would like to chat with the debaters that have been on today, you can move over to Hangout Haven. We're gonna drop up over. Oh, looks like we got a question. Just didn't do it right.
Okras has a question.
Yeah, and it's for DB nukes. If I had ability to authorize CIA ops, I would smuggle warheads scheduled for decommissioning into Taiwan and gift them to our government as a deterrent against Chinese invasion. Would you agree?
With some reservation and reluctance, yes. Because once the nukes were there, the deterrent is there. I know it's not perfect. I know there's a risk to it, but once the nukes are deployed, Xi Jinping is not stupid. He won't want Beijing to be nuked. He might raise his fist at the sky and scream, but that wouldn't change the reality. Okay, I think Dreamspace.
Surprised no one else has no other questions.
Well,
Okay,
DB, I think you froze.
Yeah, you froze.
Okay, what did you hear?
Not a whole lot.
Okay, so
the person
my
that asked the
answer
question
to
said they
the
agreed.
question.
So
yeah. Okay, yeah. So my answer,
I guess
in
they got
case
what they
anyone
were
didn't
asking.
hear, is that with some reluctance and reservations, I would approve the plan because Xi Jinping would not want Beijing to be nuked. He might raise his fist and scream at the sky, but once the deterrent is there, he knows it's there. He's not an idiot. It would defend. So yes, I would approve. I would reluctantly approve the transfer.
All right. So since we have no other questions, again, thank you both for the debaters for coming on today and having this discussion.
Thank you, too.
And thank everybody that's been
Thank you very
listening in.
much for moderating.
And we're going to go ahead and move. Everybody can move over to Hangout Haven. We can continue the discussion there, and you can ask all the questions you want at that point. Again, Whodunit has recorded this, so he has a recording of it. So and he'll be posting that to his YouTube channel, so you guys can watch it later. And it'll also be given to Ryan, who does some of the moderating on the YouTube channel. So possibly you guys could probably end up on there and have a full-on debate on the YouTube channel. So
I would love that. That would be amazing.
Yeah,
I would definitely try that.
Because Ryan seemed interested about the topic. So, you know,